noise.
That would be nice. I know how to do that, but I'm just so distracted now by all these glitches. So here we go.
Marguerite, please mute.
Like it's not recording. Is it recording? I don't see the record. Oh, yes, it is.
It is. It is recording. It's recording.
It's in a different place today
Yep.
than it usually is. And another theme for today is change. That's a big one because that's one of the big things that people have conflict about. Should we change or should we just leave things just as they are? That type of thing. So the theme is conflict literacy or illiteracy, as the case may be, because I think most of us would agree that we live in a conflict phobic society and a conflict phobic world. So we could judge this. We could judge ourselves, we could complain about this, or we could look at it as data. So at first, I want to like understand the problem together a little bit and just see, okay, we're conflict phobic. What's that about? And the way I decided to approach this first was from a historical perspective. So I want to give us a little history lesson and then I'm going to go into the skills needed to be more conflict literate. And then at the end, we'll do an exercise, a group exercise where we look into some of the conflicts that are up for us on a more personal and interpersonal level. Because I think to get conflict literate in the very complex world that we're in today, we need we need practice partners. That's what the whole getting real work is about. It's about practicing skills in smaller, safer environments that you're going to need to live in a very complex, ever-changing society. So the getting real work is background to this, and some of you don't know what I mean yet, but I'll be referring to that from time to time. So I've made some notes here because this is a little bit heady, but I wanted to get this out and see how it lands for you guys. So I'm going to first say that my aim in even getting into this topic is even though things may be very difficult in our lives in terms of conflict now and in society's hope for any resolution between the red and the blue interests and that sort of thing. We'll, as a humanity, we will get past this epic. There will be other epics. And I want us to keep those conflict skills that we're still developing alive, not just like go back into denial like we kind of all were in the 50s. So that's where I start in my historical perspective is the 50s, because that's when I grew up. But first, I want to say, according to systems thinking, because I want to bring in systems thinking here, systems develop through cycles of differentiation and integration. So when I mention the 50s, we were a very conformist society, at least in America. And so, there appeared to be a lot of integration, even though there was all kinds of differences under the surface, because disenfranchised people didn't even have a voice much in those days. Transgender rights, gay rights, people of color, all those groups were like not included that much in the conversation, and everybody just kind of kept quiet about that in the 50s. And so, the conformity became, for many of us, a problem. So things began to differentiate. The 1960s, and this is kind of when I came of age, the early 1960s, I was still wearing a girdle and bouffant hair, okay? It's crazy. It was so conformist. I mean, everything was tight. The 60s came along, and the theme of that era was do your own thing. this is a history lesson for most of you because a lot of you are not my age. And so the different interest groups began to be visible. And we began talking about different interest groups, different socioeconomic groups. There began to be the civil rights movement, the human potential movement, the women's rights movement. So all those movements and all those different groups began to differentiate. And then there's more conflict in a society. And also there's in the bigger world, politically, there was the businesses and environmental rights. I was very concerned about that even as a teenager, how corporations were polluting the waters and the air, and there were inventions, there was technology to deal with that, but the corporations were suppressing all that. So those were the kind of things that concerned me. I was, also active in the civil rights movement and those kinds of things. And so there was the polarization of the Vietnam era, which was basically the hawks and the doves, people who were in support of the war, people who weren't. But this differentiation then began to uh, create a lot of mistrust and unfriendliness. It's like we didn't know how to handle it. I'm talking from a big picture systems perspective now. This is my opinion, my analysis from just living through it and watching it. So the point of all this, though, is, we're at a point of differentiation now, which is like overstressing the system. And how do we move towards some kind of integration? I'm not going to answer that question at this point because I'm just giving us like a perspective. Like, don't take any of this personally. Is also when you see things from a big enough perspective. I mean, we are participants in this, though, and it really affects us all personally, and we need to begin to feel it as a collective. So that's one of my aims here as we go along. So just want to. I want to give you a screen share. Let me share something on my screen to just give you a little illustration. So this is an illustration. This is a New Yorker magazine cover, October 24th, 2011. If you can see this. I've got mine, change, schmange, keep things precisely as they are. So this is like the illustration of the polarization around equal rights, equal economic opportunity versus the fat cats who are saying, let's leave well enough alone. So I just wanted to kind of, I clipped that out. I've saved that for over 10 years here. And this is the first time I've had a chance to use it, which is, I just thought it was telling. So I'm stopping the share now. Even so, we're still in the 60s and 70s here, and I did a lot of organizational consulting work in those days. And the big word that all the companies were promoting was innovation. And so since that, we've had a lot of innovation, a lot of technological change, and it's stressed a lot of people. I would work with teams, and there was so much change that people were not able to keep up with it. There was so much pressure. Some of you work in tech companies and that sort of thing to keep learning new things. So this differentiation and this fast change is putting more and more stress on the system. And what began to emerge were some people who were really good at handling change. I would just call those the fast changers. Like in organizations, some people were really like, let's try all these new things. I used to consult in schools, and we had the teachers who were, I'll call them the slow changers, who said, leave it alone. This is just, it's one more gimmick that the administration is trying to foist on us. We're fine. It was sort of like those fat cats in the cartoon. And then there was younger teachers who were more had a growth mindset and wanted to try new things with their students. And so I was brought in to mediate those kind of conflicts. And I will tell you that was very, very hard because these are deep personality structure uh, situations within somebody, and different people can handle a different amount of stress and change. And so, those people that we consider other, and they were definitely considering each other, you're getting in my way of me having the life I want. When you're under stress like that, and it really affects your daily life, like, gee, I'm teaching the same old way because the other teachers won't let me, won't like certify or ratify this new idea that I brought to the administration. So, well, the world is becoming then, as I'm seeing it, and I'm working in organizations and teams and that sort of thing, as well as families and couples, that sort of thing too. But the world is becoming more and more unfriendly and dangerous for people. Okay, so there's this thing that when you don't feel psychologically safe, we begin to project onto the other. And how do we handle this kind of stress? So we're here, we're way past that now in terms of the level of pressure in our systems. Um, but I want to just go back to that time. So it was very hard to do these mediations, and sometimes they would seem to work in terms of after the consultation, but the change wouldn't stick. This is a big pain in the ass for organizational change agents, is I do all this work and everybody seems to be buying into this agreement, this consensus, but it falls apart. And we found that over and over. There were even, we used to do, and this was my vision for somebody to mediate America, was some of the designs we used to use in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s with very large groups. Like I go into the community. I remember going into the community of Dover, New Hampshire. So it's a city. And there's budgetary questions. And so we have different interest groups. We call them stakeholders. We've got the business leaders. We've got the people from the welfare department who are caring for the poor, for wanting more money for social services. Other people want fewer, less taxes, lower taxes. It's the same as now. But we would actually get them all collaborating in different subgroups all around the room, huge gymnasium type of setting. And people would, over time, come up with agreements that seemed workable. But the agreements, it's like it's easy to talk about conflict and talk through, not easy, but it's at least possible to talk through your differences, to even kind of do trade-offs in like negotiation trade-offs. I'll give you this if you'll give me that. But when it went to really implementing these new agreements, they would break down. And I don't think we've quite gotten beyond that yet. That people really don't do well with serious conflicts that affect their livelihood or their daily lives. So then we're getting more and more people with this growth mindset, and that's probably most of us here. So we want to encourage people like the organization consultants that I was a part of, that group. We want people to like be able to stretch their comfort zone and empathize with the other and these sorts of things. And those tools were around back in the 70s and 80s too. And we learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And just we probably all learned that, but we learned that if people's safety and security and belonging needs are not met, they're not going to be able to really deeply empathize with the other in a way that leads to some kind of unified action. Small communities like intentional communities, they can do it. Families can do it. Couples can do it because the stakes are high and they know they've got to work it out. And so that's, to me, that's where we have to start with the smaller systems because there's like the motivation to really hang in there and really listen when you're just going, what a waste of time. This person's full of shit. You know, they don't know what they're talking about. If you really go deeper, you might learn something. Um, in fact, I want to say that if you actually do get face to face for a long enough period of time with people who you see as other, we usually are really able to feel our common humanity. And I'm really talking about fairly high conflict situations here. And most of us don't live in that world, but I did for, a lot of years. And, you know, it was, it was almost like too hard for me. But one of the examples I want to give where I learned that just like work a little harder, Susan, to see this other's point of view. I have a relative who has always voted red, and she lives in the South. And I wanted to understand her world. And she says things like climate change is a hoax and stuff like that. Okay. Um, so, and this is not that many years ago, but she was a public school teacher in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. She's retired now. But I asked her something about like why she was a Trump supporter, why she held the beliefs that the beliefs that she did. I'll just keep it that way. We didn't really talk about the climate thing, but what she got into was back when she was a public school teacher, and LBJ was the president, Lyndon B. Johnson, and he forced the Southern schools to become more racially integrated. And eventually, integration was the law. So she was still working that issue in her mind. It's in a sense, it was a trauma for her. She said when they would force the blacks and whites to come together in the same classroom, they were kind of afraid of each other and they stayed away from each other in the classroom. And there was like this underlying conflict that she had to deal with and she didn't know how. And she said it really interfered with the students' learning. I mean, that was like the big elephant in the room that she didn't know how to deal with. And she said, I'm a teacher. I'm committed to having a good education for all these students. And it was like a passion for her. And she felt like her almost like mission in life was, I won't say destroyed, but it made it really hard for her to pursue her mission. The fact that, let's say, politics, which what some people would call it, got in the way of her teaching her students. So I could really feel her passion. And I could also understand that in a way for people like her, this was a bit of a collective trauma. And then she said some other things just in passing, like we're not so dumb down here. Things that had to do with maybe an inferiority complex that she had from being looked down on by others, being a Southerner, uh, and I even got the feeling that the Civil War was such a collective trauma for, I'm going to say for the South more than for the people in the North. That like all these old traumas to our well-being as a as a whole fabric of society. Um, I mean, there's lots of there's the Vietnam era where the big cultural split. There's the Civil War, obviously, which none of us remember. But those old wounds, if we keep not healing as a society, and who knows how to do that anyway, but if we keep all these unhealed wounds as a culture and as a people, unhealed, we build up this tendency to really see the other person as their worst self. We don't look for the common humanity. It's like in a marriage, and you know that's sort of one of my main areas of work. In a marriage, when a couple has a lot of unrepaired ruptures that just are never repaired, pretty soon, you know, the slightest little thing where I don't listen to you about something, where I walk out of the room or something, the slightest thing has you feeling like I'm against you, I'm your enemy. And because we've got all this history of you begin to stereotype your partner in certain ways. So, you know, I'll always warn couples that it's kind of dangerous to allow unrepaired ruptures in your system, in your little system. But we have so much of that in our world today in this society. So, but I do want to say that when polarized groups like I've done quite a few like black white encounter groups, or I did a lot of tea groups where people share personally with each other, sit in a room together for 5 days, or in the some of the black white groups it went on over several days, and um, there would be polarization in the groups, but then people would begin to hear each other's personal stories and where people are coming from below the level of beliefs and that sort of thing, personal traumas, personal pain. And so that began to humanize people, but very few people afforded themselves with those kind of groups. But I remember in the black white groups, we would use the fishbowl technique where all the blacks would sit in the center of the circle and they would talk about the pain that they suffered at the hands of white society. And the whites would and then the whites would listen and then show some empathy and that sort of thing because they really did. I mean, they really did feel empathy in that environment. It was a structured environment. Things, if you're going to get to understanding, a lot of times you need a carefully designed structure to keep people into their feelings, uh, using a few of the getting real truth skills, like I hear you saying this, and I imagine or I wonder if you mean that. Do you mean that? You know, checking out perceptions, knowing the difference between what you heard and the conclusions your mind jumps to. You know, those are some sense making skills that we develop as we do these growth practices. So what we began to become aware of as we got to know what's underneath people's positions and beliefs was an awareness of trauma. So now we're coming more up to date in the recent history. There's a lot more education, a lot more awareness now of how childhood trauma, whether it's like big T trauma, you know, like physical or sexual abuse, that kind of thing, or we could call it little T, but it often hurts just as much, where parents are overly critical or unsupportive in some other way. So almost everyone, we're realizing now almost everyone uh, had some kind of abuse, neglect that could be, that interfered with their optimum development. Okay, so, and of course this was true of all these people we're talking about over history, but now we're like peeling away the layers. The person in my position, is a professional evolutionary change agent, that sort of thing. Uh, my mission was to make the world safe for differences because I was always in great personal pain about the polarizations that I saw. But now that we're becoming more trauma informed, there's a kind of almost a new polarization emerging, which is let's call it the sensitive people and the tough people. And I bet some of you have seen this. It's a big thing, get off it, get back to work, kind of thing. Don't tell me about your personal stresses here. Um, so and so the tough people will call the more sensitive people snowflakes and that sort of thing. And if we're in the more sensitive group, and some of us are, a mixture, an integration of those two. But if we're a little more on the sensitive side, we'll maybe judge those other people as in denial, not very self-aware, that's, that sort of thing. So to teach conflict literacy in this world where so many of us are first, I think, before they can really empathize and really stop othering the other, we have to do quite a bit of personal healing. So, this world, how do we teach conflict literacy? So I want to give another screen share here now. I've got a kind of summary. So I'm just going to speak from this a little bit before, then we'll get into an exercise. Um, might not have time for the exercise. We'll see, because I didn't time this or anything. But I put conflict literacy into three categories, and I think I want to go fairly quickly through this, even though I can't go too quickly. So, do you know your own cognitive biases? Well, first of all, I'll just name my three categories: sense making, which has to do with self-awareness; peacemaking, which has to do with dialogue with the other; and then whole making, which has to do with the kind of trigger work that I teach, where you begin to become aware of the repressed, denied, abandoned parts of oneself. And you make peace and get connection and communication between all those parts so that you bring love and compassion to the parts of yourself that you've rejected. So, that's kind of what I teach: self-compassion, acceptance of whatever is, rather than wasting your energy judging yourself for how you should be, but really kind of getting with what is. So, back to sense making. So just like look at your own self. How much of this have you become aware of? Because this is basically self-awareness tools. Cognitive biases like the glass half empty and the glass half full. Those, those are personality styles. Those represent what helps you feel more safe in the world. They're not all, they're biases that can interfere with your ability to see things more objectively. Now, you might not like that particular example of cognitive biases. There's a lot of different ones. Some people jump to conclusions. That's in my work, a lot of times I call it control patterns. Like people who just jump to you start to say something and they jump to a conclusion that you're talking about them, and they take something personally, but it's not just a trigger thing. It also has to do with the need for certainty. The some people have a cognitive style of, everything will be all right. Don't worry. That's the same idea. And you're very averse to the experience of not knowing. Now, that's a kind of cognitive bias. That's a kind of a damaging perceptual filter that jump to conclusions and needing to know, being uncomfortable with ambiguity or uncertainty. And most of us have a certain amount of that cognitive bias, a bias toward comfort. Um, but that's what this whole evolutionary journey is working to get beyond, to expand this our ability to handle discomfort. Do you know your personality style? It's not like you should hold this as your the way you are, but your personality style, your attachment style. One of the biggest conflicts in relationships, and I would guess it even shows up in international negotiations. I've read enough about this. I haven't done those, but the difference in attachment style and the projection onto the other is a big deal. In fact, I want to stop the share for a minute because this is such a big deal. I think I might even like move to this for a little while so we become more interactive here. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many people are it would be the attachment style that likes a lot of face-to-face connection, uh, gets triggered when the other person uh, chooses to be with somebody else rather than yourself. Let's say you want to make up fast after a fight. You just can't hold it until the other person's ready, let's say. So there's those of you who want to make up quickly after a fight, and those people who need a little more time to uh, get hold of yourself. You might be less willing to just blurt things out, that sort of thing. Whereas the person who wants to make up right away, what they prefer is talking to stay connected. And the other attachment style, the partner, let's just say if it's a partner, but it can be friends and it can be anybody, somebody you work with. They prefer to sit with their feelings for a while or calm themselves down by themselves. They can't get calm when the other person's talking to them. So here's the show of hands. How many people want to like make up right away and talk it out as opposed to the other? Let me just see a show of hands there. And it okay. And how many people need some time before getting back into clearing the air and that sort of thing? Hmm. And and so let me ask those of you who raised your hands first, let's say the make up right away group, if is anyone willing to say what you like about the way you are? I mean, what kind of motivates you and just in defense of yourself, what do you like about being your way? Anybody willing to say something? Barbara, you want to unmute yourself? Barbara Amon.
Yes, from my perspective, it makes it easier to move through and move forward. In other words, the conflict doesn't remain unsettled. It steps into the possibility of clearing things up from, again, yeah, that's my perspective.
Yeah, we just need some data here. So I want other people, just whatever side you raised your hand for. And I know it depends on the situation, but thanks for playing the game here. Notice what you felt when you heard Barbara.
Is it me? Because there's always a bunch of Barbaras.
We're aiming, yeah. The one that just spoke.
Yes.
That's why I used your last name. I realized that.
Yes. Yeah.
So just notice what you felt. I'm not going to ask you to share that right this
Okay.
minute. Uh, Probably never. Uh, I want to hear from somebody on the other side who takes a while. Anybody willing to speak for that? And what do you like? What's good about it? Yeah, Scott, Ba.
Yeah, similarly, I'd say, well, not feeling safe, like wanting, yeah, just not feeling safe in the moment to say something that I imagine is going to just cause more conflict.
Ah, yeah. Okay. So again, people, notice what you feel when you hear each of these people. And now, is anybody willing to speak? And you could be on either side, but identify when you speak. Uh, what have, and I'll give you a moment to think about this. What pain have you suffered because of this difference with somebody, or what has hurt you? Like what, when you remember being in this conflict, how have you been hurt? That's the question. Anybody willing? Darcy, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, yeah. Hi. Um, so for me, it's the pain of disconnection that happens when I'm wanting to reconnect and he's not wanting to reconnect yet. My husband or partner. And it's thrown me back on myself to take another loop on healing some things in the past, some of that, painful stuff where when I was little, someone wasn't there for me and I didn't know how to be there for myself yet.
Yeah. Let me
Now,
comment on what you said, Darcy. Um, Often when partners, or even work partners, but people who have an interdependent relationship, when partners are suffering over time with that polarity, uh, I sometimes call it the parallel player versus the face-to-face player, or an attachment language. I mean, parallel just means, I'm good if you're good. Face-to-face is, I'm not good unless we're good, or unless we're connected. So the preoccupied, no, so the face-to-face is more like the preoccupied attachment style, and the more like, let me slow down here, is the is considered the avoidant attachment style. Those labels get overused sometimes, but just to name common themes. But the thing I wanted to point out here is when you're in that kind of a conflict, what one person's overlearned, like connecting and staying engaged, the other person has underlearned. And Darcy, what you said kind of reminds me of that. You were forced to learn. And so the avoidant person needs to learn that they don't have to lose themselves when they're connected. And the preoccupied person learns that they can be separate and still feel the connection, not feel abandoned, not project abandonment from their past onto the present necessarily. I mean, yes, there's feelings, there's here and now feelings, like I want you here with me right now. Doesn't have to be a want. A want like that is not a trigger reaction. But when we get like hurt, and take things personally. And I don't want that term to be a bad term. I don't feel judgmental when I say, you're taking something personally. I mean, I wouldn't even say it that way. We need to accept that. Yeah, we do take things personally, and that's where the learning begins. So, what one person's overlearned, the other person's underlearned. Just that can be a helpful frame for me sometimes, because this whole the whole evolutionary purpose of conflict is to expand our own identity, to not live in this narrow ego identity that represents our conditioning as children. You know, we can, as one person system, differentiate beyond that cozy little identity that we grew up with. And how often do people say, well, I'm like this because in my family this, or because my father or mother told me this or was this. That's a red flag, folks. You know, that you may be like attached in some way to an identity that you could outgrow. It's still, you don't have to be like you were conditioned to be. So that's what conflict in relationship shows us. It forces us out of that comfort zone if you stick with it. But see, the motivation, and I'll get back to you in a minute, the motivation to do that kind of deep work to heal conflicts, in my view, is only present in small systems, intentional communities, like I said, families, couples. Ah, but when you get into larger groups, we still haven't transferred this knowledge, but we can. So that's why I'm kind of saying let's keep our conflict skills alive here. Go ahead, conflict mediation, listening to differences. That's what I mean by conflict skills. Darcy, what were you going to say?
Um, I lost the exact thing. I think you said we can learn over time. Yeah, that was it. And as I was saying what I said, I heard my tone of voice and I realized it was just this flash of just how far I've come. You
Hmm.
know, I can
Hmm.
sit with that for, I'm not who I was because I've done all this stuff, but I mean, I'm not saying I'm perfect.
You're kind of one of my poster children for the success of trigger work with a partner. Thanks for speaking up. All right. So I'm gonna go. Well, anybody else have a comment or anything to? Oh, I didn't ask how the other side had been hurt. The people who tend to be more what they call avoidant, uh, takes time to be ready to talk again. How have you been hurt by the other? Anybody willing to share? Marissa
Hi.
or Marisa? Marisa.
Yes, you got it, Marissa. Yep.
Oh, it's Marissa. Okay.
Yeah. So I would say growing up, and my father was a very angry person, so I had to really be constantly tiptoeing around. So my nervous system always wants to kind of, escape or regulate somewhere else because it's not safe in the presence of the other person. So I think I've definitely taken that pattern into relationship.
Makes sense. Yeah. And and in an adult relationship now, how have you been hurt by the other? Have you been judged for needing to take time or any of that?
Um, Not recently. I think that I've controlled my emotions to the point where they can't feel me. It's the wall.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, kind of a failure to bond more often than not.
yeah. So thank you for that, Marissa, because that brings up the need for protection uh, that most of us have grown up with, whatever side of the pole you're on in terms of preoccupied or avoidant, let's say. There's something that you're trying to protect yourself from. And one of the sense making skills is knowing how the mind works. You know, I mentioned sense making, peacemaking, and whole making. I'll go back to that in a minute briefly. One of the sense making skills is knowing how the human ego mind, we'll call it. I mean, there's the problem solving creative mind, but we all grow up with this ego mind. You know, it's a model of the personality. I mean, the map is not the territory, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty good map. Um, the ego's job is to keep you out of danger, to keep to save your life. But now the ego is things that aren't even that dangerous to us as adults. You know, like somebody walking out of the room and saying, you know, I'm out of here or whatever. That doesn't feel safe to a lot of us because we were neglected or abandoned or you know those words, but certainly came across to us as little people who needed something else, and our parents weren't there for us. That's a developmental trauma, a cause of developmental trauma that the ego mind tries to avoid feeling that pain ever again. So understanding how the mind works as a protection and not always trusting the messages because they're basically trigger reactions, you know, like I'm really in danger here. You're not really in danger, but there's a part of you that's an important, worthy part of you that feels in danger the same way you felt when you were truly neglected or abandoned or abused. So in no way would I ever say, you know, just grow up. We have to integrate. So this is the integration that our society now is in the midst of doing, you know, from this historical perspective, the integration of realizing that in some ways, almost everyone is walking around with some hidden fear that they're not safe, they're not respected, they're not enough, they're not loved. So trying to own this, if we can own this and realize that the other is also suffering from something, that gives us a little bit of a motivation to not jump to too many conclusions based on what's comfortable for me, what's convenient for me. Like it's very inconvenient for me to have to listen to this person who just doesn't seem to see reality. But if I listen long enough, I find out something that has colored whatever their perception is. And like with that relative of mine, where her experiences with forced racial integration back in the 70s or the 60s, it was the 60s really, um, was a deep wound for her. So we're becoming more curious about the deeper motivations now, and we're seeing, and I don't know what evolutionary phase we're going to go through next, but there's certainly a lot of conflict around and a lot to learn. And so I'm kind of advocating, okay, what do I feel? What's threatened in me? And so this goes back to whole making. I think I won't go back to that screen share right now. Um, but whole making really is that inner inquiry, being able to do an inner inquiry on any uncomfortable feeling that happens to you, knowing how to like just pause, feel what's going on, see what memories, if anything, comes up, or what like feelings that are more like, I feel like running out of the room. I feel like hiding under a table. I mean, some of those kind of imagery in terms of the way you think about the feeling. I mean, those aren't exactly names of feelings. Those are what do I feel like? But those give us a lot of information. about what needs to be like felt and gone, oh, that's part of me, and that's a part of me that I tend to reject. And it was triggered by the other. So we could end here with what pain or what hurt or discomfort is whoever we're considering other. What is that other? How's that hurting me right now? I'm not going to ask for your verbal response here. It's a reflection question. But who is other to me? That's pretty salient right now. And what's the hurt? And can I be curious about what this hurt needs, what this hurting part needs, and kind of just sit with the discomfort? To me, that's after peeling away all the layers so far of what social conflict and interpersonal conflict brings up for us. I think that's where we have to start. And as I'm kind of alluding to, maybe once more and more of us have mastered this development and can bring it into our interpersonal relationships, there'll be another, even deeper source of hurt, pain, and impetus for personal development. And I just hope I live long enough to see what that is. So I think I'll just close with that. And maybe if anybody wants to, I'm going to do a couple screenshots. If anybody wants to take a screenshot of that handout that I put up, it's certainly just a smattering of the skills we all need, but I want to get a screenshot of it, and so I'll allow you guys to do the same if you want it. Screenshot is Shift, Command, and 5. I'll put it up in a second here. And I'll get it so we can, well, it'll have to be in two shots. Okay.
One thing I'll say,
Yeah,
Susan, is
please.
that I value your looking forward into where humanity is going and how can we bring, better communication to bigger places, groups, and all. And I still, as you probably do too, I still just see that we're still beginning to do that in our close relationships. It's in my experience, it's still we're way down the totem pole as far as our progress.
Yeah. Yeah. The way I'm speaking is uh, as if we had done a fair amount of this work. And I agree with you, Bill, that we're really just in kindergarten with learning how to manage our own personal triggers as a whole society. But these developments are becoming more and more talked about and understood. And yeah, we're still in kindergarten, but the more of us who take this on, maybe we'll become adults at some point in the future. So
Right.
right now, just let's have self-compassion and understanding that this takes a lot of commitment. And just like the conflict resolution work that I used to do in large systems, it's like, man, this is hard work. And personal growth is kind of the same thing. But hearing Darcy's story a little bit, after years of doing these practices, wait, there's an integration, wait. So
Yeah, we're definitely on the court.
It's on the court. I like that, Bill. And you work with couples, I work with couples. We know that a lot of couples quit at a certain point. They just, it's just like this is not going anywhere. Um, and let's forgive ourselves for that too, because we're just in a growth process, and wherever you are is where you are. And the thing is, we also, I guess I want to say one last thing is not everyone, even if we're in kindergarten, not everyone or not most people in our world aren't even in kindergarten. They don't even, they didn't even know there's this school of life available because they did not ever develop a growth mindset, but people who have a growth mindset are actually seeing the world in more of its complexity, and we got to make choices about how we use our life energy. And for us, it's about it, we have energy left for growth, but people who are lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, who are truly unsafe, they would never take on personal growth work. And and see if we can understand that that's because their situations either currently are or in their childhoods were so unsafe that that they need their defenses. People need a certain amount of defensiveness and denial, many people, in order to kind of stay in a body. Maybe we have such luxury, we can come on these webinars and so forth. And I'm very grateful for that. So let's be grateful that we have the luxury of the personal growth mindset. Okay, thanks for
Can you put up the
showing up
first
with me.
Susan?
Any
Susan, can you put
any other comments here? I know some people will drop off the call because it's after our time, but I have time. So Dusty, I want to hear from you.
I just was requesting if you could put up that first screen again because I didn't get a shot of that.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
it went away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And second, please.
Mhm. And I'll scroll it down in a minute so you can get the second half. There's not much below that.
When you got homemaking trigger work guide GP, what's GP?
Oh, guide the group. Guide
Okay.
the group. I was going to guide the group in something, but I did a real quick and dirty version of that.
Mhm. Okay.
All righty. See, you got it, folks?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Well, thank you so much for showing up for this today, and see you next month on the first Tuesday.
Thank you.
A workshop. I have a webinar coming up. These are my last two structured workshops coming up this winter and spring. I better say that. I have a Getting Real on Zoom 6-session webinar starting Tuesday, January 16th at 12 to 2 p.m. $375. It goes for 6 weeks. Very experiential. And same content, but different exercises in the May workshop, 10th and 11th at my home, um, Saturday and Sunday, 395 per person. And it's at my home in Sebastopol, California, so you have to travel. There's room in both of those. And I've decided that I am done doing structured workshops, including the way I run these webinars. I'm going to do a much more as a here and now, what's coming up, dialoguing with people, working with individuals, volunteers, um, more like an honesty salon, which is the unstructured practice, being here now with each other. But I will do teaching and some individual working with each other, or with an individual. I just don't feel like showing up for structured things that I have to prepare. I like being more spontaneous. I've done what I do for over 50 years, 55 years. I've been a teacher, and I'm going to try something new in my old age. So treat myself and don't have to prepare for things. Just show up. Okay. Thanks for supporting
Thank
me.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.